Have you ever caught yourself intensely wanting something, and when you got it, you realized it didn't change anything? Worse, that it only created new needs, no matter how much you accumulate, conquer, pursue. On the other side, only the echo of dissatisfaction, an emptiness, a tiredness, sometimes even a growing anxiety, as if stopping the chase were a failure. Epicurus observed this over 2,000 years ago. He saw that the more you desire, the more captive you become. And that freedom isn't about having many options, but about needing few things. Modern society has completely inverted this equation. It transformed desire into identity, and you became measured by what you consume, display, accumulate. A large part of human suffering is born from desires that are neither natural nor necessary. You wake up wanting things you didn't want yesterday. You see an outfit, a car, a lifestyle on social media, and suddenly it becomes an urgent need in your mind. But it's not a real need. It's a desire manufactured by comparison, by advertising, by the fear of falling behind. Epicurus said there are three fundamental types of desire: the natural and necessary ones, like eating when you have real hunger, or resting when your body asks for it. These are simple to satisfy and bring complete relief. The natural but not necessary ones, like seeking comfort beyond the basics. These can be appreciated, but shouldn't become the center of life. And those that are neither natural nor necessary, created by culture and comparison. These are never satisfied. The problem is that most people live chasing the third type. When you desire something natural and necessary, satisfaction is immediate. You drink water and the thirst passes. But when you desire something artificial, satisfaction never truly arrives. You buy that outfit, and for a few days you feel good. But soon the feeling passes, and you're already eyeing the next one. You reach a professional level, and for a moment you feel fulfilled. But in no time you're already thinking about the next step. There's no real satiation. You just move from one desire to another, always chasing something that's ahead. Epicurus realized that these artificial desires are sophisticated and well-constructed traps. They promise fulfillment, promise you'll finally feel complete, but deliver restlessness. They promise you'll finally feel fulfilled, but what you feel is an emptiness that asks for more, always more. And the worst part is you don't realize you're trapped in this vicious cycle. You think you're progressing, that you're improving your life, that you're conquering important and significant things. But you're just complicating yourself more and more. You're adding layers of dependence, of anxiety, of needs that never existed before and that will never be truly satisfied. Simplifying begins by questioning what you really need to live well, not in the abstract philosophical sense, but in the concrete, practical, day-to-day sense. Do you need 5 pairs of shoes, or do you need one that works well, that's comfortable, and that lasts? Do you need an enormous house with rooms you never use, or do you need a place that shelters you with real comfort and without suffocating you with endless debts and constant maintenance? Do you need constant validation on social media, or do you need inner peace and true connections with few people who really matter and who truly know you? The difference between these answers determines the weight of your life very directly. It determines whether you wake up every day carrying a heavy and invisible burden, or whether you wake up light, with clarity about what really matters. Epicurus wasn't preaching poverty or extreme asceticism. He himself appreciated simple pleasures and encouraged his friends to do the same. But he was pointing to the trap of chasing things that never bring what they promise. He was showing that most of your desires aren't yours. They're implanted, conditioned, manufactured by external forces that profit from your dissatisfaction. And as long as you don't see this, you'll keep chasing, accumulating, complicating yourself, and wondering why you don't feel free, why you don't feel at peace. The distinction between pleasure and excess is absolutely central in Epicurean philosophy. Pleasure for Epicurus isn't exaggeration, isn't extreme intensity, isn't overwhelming sensation. It's the absence of pain and disturbance. When you're without hunger, without thirst, without fear, without anxiety, without physical or emotional pain, you're in a state of true pleasure. This is the pleasure that Epicurus called pleasure at rest. It's what you feel when you're at peace. It's not a euphoria that passes quickly. It's a stable state of well-being that you can access at any moment, as long as your basic needs are met and you're not disturbed by impossible desires. But modern society has completely inverted this understanding. Pleasure became synonymous with intensity, with excess, with extreme sensation that needs to be constantly renewed. You're bombarded with the idea that living well is having extraordinary experiences all the time. Exotic trips, intense parties, constant consumption, entertainment without pause. And this creates an unsustainable pattern. You start to think that if you're not feeling something intense, then you're not really living. And then you lose the capacity to appreciate what's simple and stable. You lose the ability to be at peace without needing constant external stimuli. Excess promises pleasure, but delivers restlessness. When you eat too much, you don't feel better. You feel heavy, uncomfortable, regretful. When you buy too much, you don't feel more fulfilled. You feel anxious about the bills, confused by the choices, suffocated by an accumulation of things that bring no real meaning. When you seek too much recognition, expose your life too much, perform too much for others, you don't feel more secure. You feel empty, dependent on others' approval, constantly worried about what others think. The pleasure of excess is fleeting. It passes quickly and leaves a kind of emotional hangover. You feel the emptiness you were trying to fill, and now it's bigger, because you spent energy, time, and resources chasing something that couldn't truly satisfy you. But the pleasure of simplicity is stable and lasting. It doesn't need to be constantly renewed because it doesn't wear out. An honest conversation with a true friend satisfies you in a way that a party full of people you barely know will never satisfy. A simple meal made with attention, where you really taste the flavor and appreciate the food, nourishes you more deeply than an expensive banquet where you eat without paying attention. A moment of silence where you breathe and realize you're okay brings you more peace than a schedule packed with commitments that leave you exhausted and scattered. The more artificial your desires are, the more you enslave yourself, because these desires are never satisfied. They multiply. You buy expensive clothes and soon want another. You reach a professional status and soon want a bigger one. You post a photo that gets many likes, and soon you're thinking about the next one. There's no end. And you keep thinking you're living well, that you're progressing, that you're conquering important things. But you're just running on a treadmill that leads nowhere. Modern society has created entire systems to manufacture desires. You open your phone and receive stimuli calculated to awaken the sensation that you're missing something important. You see people living lives that seem perfect and start to think yours is insufficient. But these are edited versions of reality. You're comparing your real life with others' performances. And in that unfair comparison, you always lose. The freedom that's born from moderation isn't repression. It's not you depriving yourself of good things through blind discipline or some ascetic ideal that denies life. It's emotional intelligence applied in daily life. Moderation is knowing when to stop. It's understanding that more isn't automatically better, that there's an optimal point and that surpassing it brings more harm than benefit. It's realizing that less is generally enough, and that enough is a much better and more stable state than excess. Whoever desires less suffers less. This is a simple, direct equation, but extremely difficult to accept in a culture that teaches you that desiring without stopping is a sign of vitality, of ambition, that you're really living intensely. But Epicurus showed that desiring too much is a sign of internal confusion. When you desire without stopping, when you're always chasing the next thing without even knowing why, you're confused about what really matters in your life. You've lost the thread. You no longer know why you're doing what you're doing. You're just following the flow, responding to external stimuli, chasing what everyone chases because that's what's expected. And in this endless race, you lose your freedom. Because you're not consciously choosing. You're just reacting, just being carried along. Moderation doesn't mean never having pleasure. It means knowing where the limit is between real pleasure and suffering disguised as pleasure. You can eat well without eating too much. You can have comfort without living in exaggeration. You can have friends without needing to impress everyone. You can have a good life without needing to show off, without needing to prove anything to anyone. Moderation puts you in control. You consciously choose what enters your life. It's not advertising that chooses for you. It's not others' opinions. It's not the fear of falling behind. It's you, with clarity, with discernment, with emotional intelligence. Many desires are born from fear. Fear of lacking, fear of losing, fear of not belonging, fear of being invisible, fear of being considered inferior. You buy things you don't need because you're afraid of falling behind, of seeming less than others, of being judged as someone who didn't make it. You accumulate because you're afraid of not having in the future, even though you already have more than you need now. You seek status, recognition, constant validation because you're afraid of being invisible, of not mattering, of being forgotten. Epicurus realized that fear is the invisible motor behind much of consumption and the incessant search for more. And this fear usually isn't based on real threats, but on social constructions about what it means to have value. Simplifying is dismantling that fear. It's looking at it honestly and asking if it's really based on something concrete or if it's just a construction of your mind fed by unfair comparisons. Most of the time, the fear isn't real. It's inflated, exaggerated, created by constant comparison and lack of clarity about what you really need to live well. You're afraid of not having enough money, but enough for what? To maintain a standard that you yourself created or that was imposed from outside. You're afraid of being judged, but by whom? By people whose opinion really matters, or by an abstract mass of expectations that you don't even know where they come from. When you simplify your needs, when you reduce what's really essential, you realize the fear was disproportionate. You don't need as much as you thought. And when you stop needing so much, you stop being afraid of losing. You can face changes with more serenity. You can deal with losses without feeling your life has collapsed, because your life isn't built on fragile things that can disappear at any moment. This is one of the most profound forms of freedom. You don't depend on external circumstances to be well. You're not at the mercy of the market, of others' opinions, of economic changes, of life's twists and turns. You're well because you built a life that doesn't demand the impossible from you. A life you can sustain with what you have, with who you are, without needing to sell yourself, without needing to constantly perform, without needing to pretend to be someone you're not. For Epicurus, freedom is living without constant disturbance. He called this state ataraxia. It's not happiness in the sense of permanent euphoria. It's not always being joyful, always excited, always at the peak of emotion. It's tranquility. It's the absence of internal agitation. It's waking up without that feeling of desperate urgency, without the mental list of everything you need to do, have, be. It's sleeping without your mind racing, thinking about everything you don't have, everything you need to do, everything that could go wrong. And simplicity creates this state of deep calm very directly. Because when you have few real needs, you have few genuine reasons to worry. Your life doesn't depend on 1,000 things going right at the same time. When you don't depend on 1,000 things to be well, you're well almost always. You're not always running after something that's missing. You're not always afraid of losing what you have. You're not always comparing yourself, always judging yourself insufficient, always thinking your life should be different. You're present, lucid, at peace. And this only happens when you simplify your choices. When you stop complicating your own life with desires that aren't yours, with needs that were implanted from outside, with expectations you never questioned. Ataraxia isn't passivity or resignation. You continue living, working, relating, seeking things that make sense to you, but you do it without the weight of constant anxiety, without the feeling that you're always late, always losing, always insufficient. You have clarity about what really matters. And this clarity gives you an emotional stability that doesn't depend on external circumstances. You can deal with changes, with losses, with frustrations, Because your foundation isn't in fragile things. It's in something simple, solid, that you can carry with you in any situation. It's a piece you built from the inside out, not something you try to capture from the outside in. The less you need, the less you depend. Dependence is a silent and insidious form of prison. You depend on your salary, so you accept humiliating situations at work because you're afraid of losing your income. You depend on others' opinions, so you live performing, pretending, hiding who you really are. You depend on constant validation, so you're always exposed, always vulnerable to judgment, always worried about what others think. You depend on a high standard of living, so you can't leave a job that drains you, can't change cities, can't make choices that make sense emotionally, but don't make sense financially within that standard. And every time you depend, you lose a piece of your freedom. You get trapped, not by visible chains, but by bonds you created yourself without realizing. They're psychological, emotional, financial bonds. You got used to a certain standard, and now you can't imagine living any other way. You got used to a certain validation, and now you need it to feel whole. You got used to a certain level of comfort, and now you're afraid of losing it, and each of these dependencies makes you less free, less capable of making choices based on what makes sense for you. Epicurus saw that simplicity reduces unnecessary bonds directly and concretely. When you need little, you can live well in almost any situation. You can face changes without collapsing. You can deal with losses without feeling your life is over. Because your life isn't built on fragile things that can be taken from you at any moment. It's built on something simple and solid, on basic needs you can meet, on values you carry within you, on a clarity no one can take away. You're not at the mercy of circumstances. You have room to maneuver. You can make choices based on what makes sense for you, not just on what keeps you tied to an unsustainable standard that has taken root in your life. This doesn't mean isolation or escape from society. It means real autonomy. You're not at the mercy of external forces. You can choose to stay in a job or leave because you're not trapped by a standard of living that requires you to stay there at any cost. You can truly choose your friendships without fear of being alone because you don't depend on constant approval to feel good. You can change cities, change course, start over because your needs are light and portable. You don't need an enormous infrastructure to be well. You carry the essential within you. The less you need, the freer you are to move, to change, to experiment, to refuse what doesn't make sense, to say no, to choose. And this is the freedom that really matters. Not the theoretical freedom of being able to do anything, but the concrete freedom of being able to make choices that are aligned with who you really are, with what you really value, without being trapped by dependencies you created yourself without realizing. Epicurus valued bread, water, friendship, and silence, not because he was ascetic or because he despised pleasure, but because he realized something fundamental about the nature of human satisfaction. Simple pleasure is stable. Excessive pleasure is unstable. When you depend on extreme experiences, on intense sensations, on constant consumption to feel good, you're always chasing the next dose. You can't be at peace. You're always restless, always needing more, always thinking what you have isn't enough. But when you learn to appreciate the simple, you have access to pleasure all the time. A conscious walk where you pay attention to the movement of your body, to the air entering your lungs, to the sensation of being alive. An honest conversation where you really listen and are heard. A moment of silence where you just breathe and realize you're okay. These things cost nothing and are always available. You don't need to plan, you don't need to pay, you don't need to wait for the right opportunity. The pleasure of simple things is deeply underestimated in a culture obsessed with intensity. Society teaches you to seek the extraordinary. It teaches you that living well is accumulating remarkable experiences, is always doing something impressive, is having stories to tell, photos to post, achievements to show off. But the extraordinary tires you out. It demands constant effort, elaborate planning, money, energy you don't always have. And in the end, it often disappoints. Because you created expectations so high that reality can't meet them. You come back from an expensive trip, and soon you're thinking about the next one, because the experience didn't fill the emptiness you thought it would fill. You buy something you've wanted for months, and the satisfaction lasts a few days. But the simple never disappoints, because you don't place absurd expectations on it. You just appreciate without creating a giant mental event around it. And in the appreciation of the simple, you find a satisfaction that doesn't need to be constantly renewed, that doesn't depend on perfect circumstances. You don't need to travel to the other side of the world to feel peace. You can feel peace on a walk in the park near your house, observing the trees, feeling the sun on your skin. You don't need an expensive restaurant meal to feel pleasure. You can feel pleasure in a simple dish, made with attention, eaten with awareness, appreciating each flavor. You don't need 1,000 friends to feel connected. You can feel deeply connected with 2 or 3 people who really know you and accept you as you are, without judgments, without performances. The illusion that more choices bring happiness is one of the great traps of modernity. You think having 50 coffee options on the menu makes you freer, more satisfied. But actually, it paralyzes you. You waste time deciding, become anxious about the choice, regret it later, keep thinking if the other option would have been better. Many choices confuse, tire, and frustrate, because each choice requires mental energy. And when you have too many choices, you exhaust your capacity to decide well. You end up in a state of analysis paralysis, unable to move forward. Or you choose impulsively just to end the decision, and then you keep ruminating about whether you chose right. Simple choices relieve the mind and give you back energy for what really matters. Epicurus didn't live in the digital age, but he would perfectly understand the modern problem. You have access to infinite options, infinite comparisons, infinite possible paths. And this doesn't liberate you. It imprisons you in perpetual dissatisfaction. Because there's always another option you didn't explore, another path that might have been better, another version of life that seems more interesting. When you simplify your choices, you escape this trap. You choose what works for you and move forward. Without infinite rumination, without constant comparison, without that feeling that you could always have chosen better. You make conscious choices based on what really matters to you, not on what seems impressive, not on what everyone's doing, not on what algorithms push at you. And when you simplify like this, your mind rests. You're not always in internal conflict, always questioning yourself, always thinking you should be doing something else. You're present in what you chose, truly living, not just navigating infinite possibilities. Simplicity as an antidote to anxiety is absolutely concrete and practical. It's not abstract theory. Anxiety grows when desires multiply out of control, when demands pile up one on top of another, when you're trying to do 10 things at once and can't do any of them well, with attention and presence. You want 10 different things, need to be in 3 places at once, have to respond to 15 urgent demands. You're always late, always owing explanations, always insufficient. Your mind can't handle this overload. It wasn't made for this. No human mind was. Simplifying is reducing internal noise deliberately and consciously. It's choosing fewer things, but choosing well. It's having fewer commitments, but commitments that really matter to you and that make sense with your values. It's having fewer goals, but goals that make sense with who you are and with what you really value in life. It's saying no to what's not essential, even when there's external pressure for you to say yes, even when everyone around you is saying yes. And this isn't selfishness, it's self-preservation, it's practical intelligence. It's you recognizing you have human limits and that respecting these limits is essential for you to be able to live well, function well, be truly present. When you simplify, your mind truly rests. You're not always on maximum alert, always chasing, always worried about 1,000 things at once. You're present, and presence is the direct opposite of anxiety. Anxiety is being mentally in the future, worried about what could go wrong, about what you won't be able to do, about what will be missing. Presence is being here, now, dealing with what's real in this moment. And what's real when simplified is generally manageable. You can handle it, you can breathe, you can be okay. For Epicurus, friendship is more valuable than status or wealth. True friendship is an essential good, not an accessory. It's not something you seek after you've achieved everything else, after you've become rich, famous, successful. It's what sustains the good life from the beginning. It's what gives you emotional security, acceptance, real belonging. And true friendship is simple. It doesn't require elaborate performances. It doesn't require you to be different from who you are. It accepts you, strengthens you, gives you a solid foundation to deal with life's difficulties. Simple relationships strengthen emotional freedom in profound ways. When you have real friends, people who truly know you and accept you as you are, you don't need validation from strangers. When you have deep connections with some people, you don't need 1,000 superficial connections. You can have a simple, focused, meaningful social life. Epicurus created a community based on friendship, not on rigid hierarchy, not on internal competition, not on status or power, but on genuine affection, on mutual respect, on reciprocal care. And this community gave him and his friends a solid foundation to live well, to face difficulties, to support each other. Because life is lighter when you're not alone facing everything. But it's also important that you're not surrounded by relationships that drain your energy, that demand constant performances, that make you feel inadequate or in competition. The mistake of postponing life is extremely common and deeply destructive. You think you'll live well when you have more money, more recognition, more achievements. When you finally reach that goal you've been chasing for so long, when you get that promotion, that house, that ideal relationship. But that moment never truly arrives. Because when you reach a goal, you're already thinking about the next one. The brain quickly adapts to achievements, and soon they become the new normal. There's always a next step. There's always something more you could have, that you should seek, that would finally make you feel complete, fulfilled, enough. Always seeking more makes life suspended in the future. You're never really living. You're always preparing to live, always postponing, always thinking the good life is just ahead, after the next achievement, after the next goal is reached. And the years pass, and you realize you spent your whole life chasing something that never arrived, because you never stopped to really live what you had. You never appreciated the present. You never gave yourself permission to be satisfied with enough. You were always looking ahead, always dissatisfied, always thinking something fundamental was missing. Simplicity returns the present very concretely. When you simplify your needs, when you reduce your desires to what's really essential, you realize you already have enough. You can live well now. You don't need to wait for some future achievement that may never come. You don't need to accumulate more things, more money, more recognition. You're already in a position to live a good life. Epicurus taught that the good life isn't grandiose in the sense of being spectacular, extraordinary, impressive to others. It's present, simple, habitable for you, and you have access to it now, not in some distant future, not after you become someone different. Now, being who you are, with what you have. The freedom not to compete is rare and valuable. Comparison is born from inflated desires, from artificial needs, from a culture that teaches you that you only have value if you're better than others. You look to the side and feel you're behind, that you're losing, that you're not enough. You see someone with more success, more money, more recognition, and feel your life is wrong. But this only happens because you're measuring your life by standards that aren't yours. You're using external metrics to evaluate your worth. You're competing in a race you never chose to run. Simplifying is getting out of that race. It's understanding you're not competing. You're living. And living isn't a competition. There's no ranking of who's living better. There's no prize for who accumulates more, achieves more, impresses more. When you simplify, you stop obsessively looking to the sides. You look inward, and you realize that what really matters has nothing to do with what others are doing. It has to do with your peace, with your clarity, with your integrity, with you living in a way that makes sense for you, not for others' expectations. You don't need to be the best at anything. You need to be well, and being well is a state that doesn't depend on comparison. It doesn't depend on you being superior to anyone. It depends on you having built a life that doesn't suffocate you, that doesn't exhaust you, that doesn't make you wake up every day with a feeling of inadequacy. A simple, clear, habitable life. True security comes from needing little. Whoever needs little doesn't live in constant fear. This is one of the most profound and stable forms of freedom that exists. You're not afraid of economic crises because your needs are modest and you can sustain them even in difficult times. You don't depend on everything going right all the time to be able to live. You're not afraid of losing status or recognition because you never depended on that to feel good about yourself, to have a sense of self-worth. You're not afraid of external judgment because you built a life based on what really matters to you, not on what others expect, approve, or consider impressive. Epicurus realized something fundamental that most people still don't understand, and that goes against everything society teaches. Security doesn't come from having much. It comes from needing little. The more you need, the more vulnerable you are, more dependent on circumstances, more at the mercy of forces you don't control. When you need little, you're genuinely resilient. You adapt to changes without collapsing. You don't panic when things change, when the economy fluctuates, when plans don't work out, because your life doesn't depend on fragile circumstances. It doesn't depend on a stable market, on an always growing economy, on everything working out all the time. It's built on a solid and simple foundation, on needs you can meet in almost any situation. And this gives you an emotional and practical security that no amount of money or external achievements can truly give. Because this security comes from within, not from without. Living simply isn't living with little. This is the great misconception that needs to be undone, because many people reject simplicity, thinking it means deprivation or scarcity. Epicurus shows that living simply is living with real quality, not with forced scarcity. You're not depriving yourself of good things. You're choosing well. You're separating the essential from the superfluous with discernment. And when you do this with clarity and honesty, you realize the essential is abundant and accessible. You have time to do what matters because you're not always running after things that make no real difference. You have mental clarity because you're not overloaded with decisions, commitments, and possessions that drain your attention. You have presence because you're not always in the future chasing the next achievement. You have true connections because you chose relationships that nourish instead of accumulating contacts that just take up space. The simple life is rich in experiences that really matter and that leave deep marks on you. It's not full of things that impose weight without adding real meaning, that complicate without enriching. It's light, but deep. You appreciate more because you're not distracted by excesses, because your attention isn't fragmented among 1,000 stimuli. You connect more deeply with people and moments because you're not performing all the time. You're not documenting everything for an imaginary audience. You truly rest because you're not always chasing the next achievement, the next goal, the next thing that will finally make you feel complete. You're already complete. You're already living. And this realization changes everything. The good life, in Epicurus's view, is quiet and sufficient. When your choices are simple, when your needs are clear and modest, life stops being a constant struggle and becomes habitable. You're not always in internal conflict, always divided, always questioning if you're on the right path. You're not always dissatisfied with what you have, always thinking something fundamental is missing. You're not always chasing something that's ahead, always postponing well-being to a future that never arrives. You're at peace with what you have, with who you are, with the rhythm of your life. And this peace isn't passive or resigned. It's an active, conscious, chosen peace. Epicurus didn't promise life would be easy. He didn't deny there are real difficulties, painful losses, inevitable frustrations. But he promised that life could be tranquil even amid difficulties. And tranquility comes from simplicity, not from incessant accumulation that leaves you always worried about losing what you have, not from achievement without pause that leaves you always exhausted, always insufficient, not from constant approval from others that leaves you always vulnerable, always dependent. It comes from you knowing what you really need to live well, and having the courage to live according to that, even when the culture around you pressures you to want more, to seek more, to never be satisfied, to never stop competing and comparing. The freedom Epicurus offers isn't the fantastical freedom of having everything, of being capable of everything, of never encountering limits. It's the concrete freedom of not needing everything. It's the freedom to choose with clarity and discernment. It's the freedom to live without paralyzing fear, without constant anxiety, without the feeling you're always missing something important. When you simplify your choices, when you reduce your needs to the essential, when you stop chasing desires that were never really yours, you free yourself, not from responsibilities or from reality, but from illusions. And this is the freedom that truly transforms the quality of your life. The simpler your choices are, the freer you'll be. If this content made sense to you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to receive the next videos. And leave a like so more people can have access to this reflection.